This lecture is part 2 in a series I'm doing on muscles. And in this lecture, I'm going to mostly cover the different types of muscle tissue and some of their general properties. That, of course, is our learning objective today, is to know the different types of muscle tissue and some of their general properties. And then, of course, I'll follow up with additional lectures on the myocytes themselves, which is the muscle fiber, on their structure, form, and function. But let's start with the different types of muscle first. As you know from my first introduction here, there's skeletal muscle. Well, there's also cardiac muscle and smooth muscle as well. Let's take a closer look. Both skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle are striated. And when we start studying the skeletal muscle itself, you'll learn why those muscles are striated, and that's based on the structure of the contractile proteins forming those muscles. So you'll notice some differences here between skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Okay, let's take a close look at each one of these types of muscle tissue. Now the first one is skeletal muscle. This is also striated muscle tissue because of the structure of the myofibrils, which is an organelle inside of these muscles, and of course they're striated. So skeletal muscle is of course very long, and they're arranged parallel to each other. And you'll notice they also have multiple nuclei. That makes sense. If you have a muscle that is 30 centimeters long, and you've got to make a protein or have the activities of that cell regulated, well, it'll take forever, or the mRNA will never even get down to the other part of the cell. So because these cells are so long, they have multiple nuclei regulating the functionings at localized areas within those cells. And of course, whenever you usually see a multinucleated cell, that's because that was formed from the merger of many small cells. Now, to be clear, and I've said this before, skeletal muscle fibers, those are also the muscle cells, also known as the myocyte. Myo means muscle, cyte, C-Y-T-E, means cell. So I'm going to generally stick with the term muscle fiber, but that is talking about the individual muscle cell. And of course, I just mentioned they're multinucleated so that they can control various regions of the cell because they're quite large. Also, our skeletal muscles, they are the only ones that are under voluntary control. That means you can think about what you want to do. You can't control cardiac muscle or smooth muscle. Okay, now, as you know, skeletal muscles are used mostly for movement. Well, they're all used for movement, right? So most of them are attached by connective tissue to the skeleton. So when a muscle cell contracts, it causes a joint to articulate and you move. Our second type of muscle that's also striated is the cardiac muscle. There are some key differences. First, they are found only in the heart. And these muscles are built for rapid contraction. And the way it does this is that you've got these smaller cells that are branched, okay? Those branches connect at the intercalated disc. And at that disc, you've got all of these gap junctions and desmosomes. Now remember, desmosomes are proteins that join cells together very strongly. Now you've also got gap junctions, which allow for the cytoplasm to communicate with each other. You have a mixing of a cytoplasm. So that means a signal in one cell can rapidly be transmitted to another cell. So all of these branching and gap junctions allow for these muscle cells to contract rapidly. Of course, the third type of muscle cell are your smooth muscles. These are long and flat, and you find them in all of your hollow organs. So for example, you can swallow standing on your head or laying down. Well, the reason why is because your esophagus has smooth muscle that will contract, moving your food into your stomach. Another example of a smooth muscle would be like a uterus. it will contract very hard during childbirth, and that, of course, is involuntary. There are several properties of muscles that are important: contractibility, excitability, conductivity, extensibility, and of course, elasticity. Let's take a closer look at each one of these. Contractibility. All right, I mean, the name says everything, right? How well can a muscle contract? And when a muscle contracts, the proteins inside the muscle are being drawn closer together, okay? Now, this doesn't have to shorten the cell. I mean, you can flex right here. I'm not shortening the cell, causing a movement, but often it does. Okay, our muscle cells are excitable. I know, they're like me. They get excited about things from some type of stimulus, right? I'm excited talking about muscle cells contracting because I think they're absolutely fascinating. But muscle cells are excitable. That means they can respond to a stimulus, and that stimulus might be a chemical signal, okay? So like a uterus will begin to contract when it starts getting lots of oxytocin during the process of childbirth. You might get a electrical signal. That's why if you get shocked, your muscles vibrate, right? That is also how we can, and then the chemical signals and electrical signals, this is how our muscles will contract using our nervous system. And you can also get a mechanical stretch as well. Now, muscle cells are also conductive. They have lots of calcium in them, and that allows for electrical charges to move across the entire plasma membrane. Of course, muscle cells are extensible. They have extensibility. They can be stretched without rupturing. And we're going to learn about cool proteins like titin. I know, titin, what a cool name for a protein that allows these cells to be extensible without breaking. And then, of course, muscle cells are elastic. What that means is if you take a muscle cell and you stretch it, it will return to its original shape after it's been stretched. Okay, well, that was a very short lecture on the properties of muscle cells. In our next lecture, we're going to talk about the structure and function of the muscle fiber itself. So that one's got a lot of information on it. Until next time, it's Tom Kennedy Science.